she was named one of the Foreign Policy magazine's top 100 thinkers of 2010. And she is credited for successfully advancing trade and business in Africa. She is recognized as one of the world's foremost experts in Africa trade. Now, my guest was very instrumental in the formation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which is the first ever comprehensive U.S. policy initiative towards Africa. My guest is the president and CEO of the Whitaker Group, which has brought to the African continent over $1 billion in trade, investment, and capital flows to the continent. My guest is Rosa Whitaker, and it's great to have you on the show. Ma'am.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Your life has been inspirational to a lot of people. Africa is more like your baby. I mean, you've led investments into Africa. You've done great with the AGOA initiatives, although I'm not very sure how successful you will rate Ghana's participation in AGOA. How did you manage all of this?
Well, I think that the key is really discovering your purpose in life. I believe that everyone is born with a God-ordained assignment and a call, which is what, or how I would define passion. You know, in Jeremiah 1:5, the Lord tells Jeremiah, I knew you before I formed you. Before I formed you, I knew you.
And I called you by your name.
And I called you by your name. I think that is the key. I think it is in life, when we can figure out why God gave us life, our purpose for being, then I think that helps everything else to fall in place. So I never viewed Africa as a profession. I never viewed Africa as a job. I'd always viewed it as a call. And my search started when I worked to figure out, to get close to God and to figure out what would you have me do. And I believe no one can beat you doing what God put you here to do.
You're very spiritual, are you? You sound it. Very
well,
spiritual.
I am the Archbishop Duncan Williams' wife. We didn't mention that. So yes, I think that I think that is the only place of safety, the only ark of safety in life is to have that intimacy with God.
And is that what drives you, or the other things which drive you in most of the things you have achieved for yourself?
Yes, that is what drives me. I can't say it's always driven me, but I can say that when I have not been aligned with God's purpose in my life, I've walked in error. And so over time, you figure out that the best place to be is to be a surrendered, yielded vessel for the purposes and call of God. And I think that God, when He calls you to do something, He'll give you the giftings. He'll give you the grace to do it. And so that is really, many people don't like to hear it, but I really don't have another answer, because I really cannot take credit for what God has managed to do through me. And it's just, it really is just as simple and as truthful as that.
So tell us how you grew up. Did your growing up and the influences that shape your ambitions start very early?
Well, I can say that everyone said I was always special, that there was something always different about me. I was a very mature child. I will say that I grew up in a family that did not have a lot of money. I grew up with working parents. I grew up with many of the challenges that I see a lot of young people going through now. So in that way, I hope my life is an inspiration. My parents were divorced when I was early. I had a father that abandoned the family. Then God blessed us with a wonderful stepfather. My parents had to work hard. I had to work. I worked from the time I was 14. I understood that if I didn't work hard in school, that college would not be possible, that I had to get a scholarship. I grew up in the midst of the 1960s in America. So like every child of or African-American young person, I faced racism. But I can say that instead of becoming bitter about the racism or deterred, that I saw as an opportunity to become better. My mother had always taught
But how did you
us.
manage to live above that? I mean, for many people who may have been in that situation, they would have had a lot of excuses to remain down and not up.
I think I was really inspired by my mother, who really had a wealth of wisdom and really trained us that we did not have the luxury of making excuses, that you can be bitter or you can be better. And we understood that we were Black, African American, and that the best way out was education, and that we had to study 10 times as hard, that we had to work when other people were sleeping. So I grew up with a strong sense of discipline and purpose. And I've always wanted a big life, a better life, not for myself, but because I was not protected from the harsh realities of struggle, of lack, of racism. I just grew up with the notion that I would be an agent for change in the world.
Agent for change. So are you an agent for change?
I would hope so.
Is that how you would describe yourself?
That's the way I describe myself.
And
I'm excited.
Would you say you've been changing since you set out to do it?
Well, wherever I am, I like to be a part of a transformation process. So when I was in government, for example, I didn't want to just be a government worker. I started in government thinking about how I could change things. And whether it's mentoring someone or whether it was looking to see how I could best improve policies. I was living in Abidjan, working at the American Embassy in Abidjan, when I and others started thinking about the African Growth and Opportunity Act, driven by a passion to see the conditions in Africa improve and looking at what we know wasn't working. And so that's how we then started to work on a trade policy that would expand the U.S. approach from Africa from one of aid to trade and investment. So I think that whenever I encounter people, I am excited about the opportunity to see how I can transform a life.
There have been concerns that most aid that go to developing economies like ours are wasted. So normally when policymakers talk, they talk about policies. But as an individual who has been engaged in formulation of policies to ensure that they affect the people, you personally did some things on your own. Tell us about some of those and why you chose some of these projects.
Well, we just, I think, I always say we because I wasn't alone. I've always worked with teams. We just really looked at what wasn't working and what was working. And what I know is that no region of the world, no country in the world has ever transitioned from poverty to prosperity through aid. That happens through leadership, it happens through business, it happens through investments. And so I was very concerned about this approach to having just aid and thinking we can transform lives and economies. And so we were looking at what was missing and how we could improve on it. And that's what we started to work towards.
Are you happy with where you are now in the stage of your life?
I'm never quite happy because I always think there's more to do. I think that when I look at Africa, I think there's a lot of untapped potential, a lot of more things that I would want to do, things that I'm working on doing. And so I'm never quite content with where things are. I'm content that that I feel very blessed. I'm content that I hear the voice of God. I know He's with me. I know He knows me. And so I'm happy about that. But in terms of what I'm doing and what I'm achieving, I don't think I'll ever be totally happy about that.
What about
always
marriage?
More to do.
You're married to the Archbishop Duncan Williams, a very influential man in our generation. How did you meet?
We met in church.
What church was that?
Action here.
Tell us how you met, really. I mean, just meeting?
Well,
Did he see you and liked you, or you came into working contact?
No, I think that, really, I had been really praying to God for guidance for church. I was in a church in Washington. I was living in Washington at the time. I was working in Ghana. And someone brought me to Action. And at the time, I had some visibility. So the ushers asked me if I would um, come to the stage. And so actually the Archbishop came out. He preached a sermon that I thought was one of the best I ever heard. I felt the presence and a move of God in the church that I'd never experienced before. Now, at the time, I was looking for God. I was not looking for a husband. I would say that that God led me to the church. And so I just decided that I had to be a part of what I consider to be a move of God, not only in Ghana, but throughout the world. And so I very much came into this and knowing the Archbishop as my pastor, as my teacher. And I certainly didn't think it would end up in a marriage.
Yeah.
And I always tell him, had I known that he was going to be my husband, I wouldn't have shared so much information, that he has way too much information. But I think that it was really a God thing. It was really, I think, something that
So
God has done.
before him, had you always been spiritual?
I think I was. I was always searching for answers. I think he's brought a lot of clarity, a lot of teachings, a lot of direction and guidance to my spiritual walk. But I have always loved God. I've always been aware of his presence, and I've always been searching for him.
I've met him just once, and in my first encounter with him, I found him to be very down to earth and humble. But he's a very powerful man in our society. How do you relate to him? Do you relate to him as the one I see down to earth, humble, or powerful, the one everyone else sees in the public eye?
Well, I think that, and I think he would agree, that humility is power. And I relate to him with a great deal of respect and awe. I relate to him as a husband, as still my pastor, as my teacher, as one that I've submitted to, as a wife, and as, as a member of the church. But I think that his humility is part of what I think really attracted me to him. And I think humility is a virtue. And if we look at the things that, that God really likes, I think you would see that he likes humility. It's very hard to be proud and boastful when you recognize that whatever you have is through the grace and provision of God and not yourself.
Well, you're watching PM Express Personality Friday, and my guest is Rosa Whitaker. We'll take a break, and when we return, we'll delve further into this woman who has brought a lot of influence to our continent, and she might inspire you for a new direction. I'm having a chat with Rosa Whitaker Duncan Williams, the wife of the Archbishop Duncan Williams. So how did you you're an American, you live in America.
Yes.
How did you end up in a Ghanaian church?
Actually, at the time, I was working for the government of Ghana.
Okay.
I have a company. I was in the executive office of the president as the assistant trade representative for Africa, came in with President Clinton, remained with President Bush, and then decided to establish my own firm that would facilitate trade and investments in Africa. At that time, we were also working with countries to help them bring in capital and investments. And I was very pleased that Ghana was one of the countries that I was working with, and that brought me to Ghana regularly. And I ended up in church.
And then that's how it
And
happened.
that's how it.
I mean, when I see yourself, you are a high-profile person. For me, I'll describe you so. And I describe the Archbishop also as a very high-profile person. Two high-profile people, how do you manage your relationship?
Oh, well, I think it's quite easy. One, I think that the real issue with any marriage has to be God-centered. And I always say that you can not only love the person, you have to love their purpose. You have to love the call on their life. And so when you have your priorities, I love my husband, but I equally love the call of God on his life. And so I look at my role is to help protect that call, to help to him to carry out his call. And I think he would look at me in a similar light. He is very supportive of what I do. But we also keep our priorities straight. I know that there's some global assignments I would love to take on if I were single, and I'm not. And so I make adjustments and I prioritize. And so I think that it becomes, it works when you know that God is in it. And I believe that is the key.
What do you do for leisure?
Now that is a struggle because I really don't have much leisure time. And so I am really working to rediscover hobbies. I enjoy my work. I enjoy the family. And so I find that I don't have that much leisure time, but I do read. I enjoy spas around the world.
And he shares in that with you?
Yeah, I think he does share in that.
So, I mean...
But I wish I could play golf. I wish I could sing. I wish I could dance. But
you don't do any of those.
I can't say that I'm gifted in those areas. I've tried golf. I used to love to dance. And now my dancing is quite frankly dated. So I don't think that, and I feel like if you're not going to be the best at something, so I tried playing golf. I'm left-handed, so it was just a rather clumsy thing. And so I'm still searching for that hobby that will be fun.
But you're a very beautiful woman. You could have done anything. What drove you into trade and investment?
Really, it goes back to a call. It's really, I think that Africa is where I felt called. And then I find the more I worked in Africa, the more I studied Africa, the more I was burdened. Like, why do we have a scenario where the richest, resource-rich region of the world has the poorest people? Why I was really just burdened by what I had seen in Africa and felt compelled to contribute in some way. I don't feel like I'm a savior and going to transform everything. I don't feel like I can move mountains, but I can shovel my bed of dirt while I'm here to make a difference. And so I believe that was part of my call. How can I be a vessel for transformation, economic and social transformation in Africa? Why Africa? I think it was just a call because my parents told me that even as early as 2-3 years old, I was talking about Africa, and we don't know why. Because no one in my family had been to Africa. I had never been. I didn't read any books about Africa. It was just Africa. So I just feel like it was probably something I was born with. And I noticed that when you do something that God gives you the grace to do, you kind of do it better. If I would definitely not be a success, for example, if I was in a technology job, or if I had to be a scientist, that would be a struggle. Yeah. And so you just go with what you do best and try to make a difference.
So do you have family in Ghana? Like siblings, direct siblings of yours in Ghana?
No, I have my family's in and out. I have a family that come in and out. They love Ghana, but no one that's directly staying.
When you come to Ghana, and I'm sure that you may see around you the challenge of education, the challenge of young girls trying to raise themselves up and get careers and get moving. What do you feel like telling people like that with the ambition or aspiration to climb as higher as you have reached?
I would tell them, and I think this is redundant, I would tell them to find God's call and purpose for your life. And I would tell them to protect and guard their self-esteem. I see that the problem that many young women have is that for whatever reason, their self-esteem is being attacked. It gets attacked through media, it gets attacked through teachers, it can get attacked through parents, it get attacked through relationships. And I just find people who have lost hope, a lot of young women, who really don't believe that they can do what it is they want to do. I see young women a lot who don't even have the motivation to get up in the morning and do something. And so I would just tell them, find God's purpose, do what you love to do, what you're called to do, and protect your confidence and your self-esteem. Don't be in any kind of situation or relationship where your self-esteem is under attack.
If you had the second chance to do something else, would you have done anything different from what you set out to do and what you've achieved today?
Oh, I would have done so many things so differently. I think that is the thing about aging. We all wish that we had known then what we know now. There's certain things, and my mother used to say, you only learn them by continuing to have birthdays. So I wish I had the wisdom. I would have done probably a lot of things differently.
Like what?
I think that for sure I would have been more serious about identifying my purpose. For in the younger part of my years, I was
great.
responding to, yeah, I think it could have always been better. I probably would not have studied political science, for example. I find political science, political science to me is not something I would have studied, because if you have an interest in political science, I believe that you could learn political science in the books. But at that time, people said, oh, you got something special, I think you should go into politics. So my mentors, and they had groomed me into going into politics. My family had brought me at an early age. At 8 years old, I was a part of the March on Washington with a big sign, Jobs, Peace, and Justice. And I kind of was groomed as a social activist. So I think that and all that was fine. I think it was part of what has brought me to this point. But I would have liked to have discovered earlier what it is I was really called to do. I would have certainly spent more time with God in my youth. That certainly would have been very useful.
You talked about mentors. Who are your mentors, and what particularly about them inspired you?
Well, I have a lot of, I started off, I think my mother was my greatest mentor. She had incredible strength. She was just, she overcame incredible obstacles. I'm not really impressed with, I've been around a lot of famous people, around a lot of wealthy people, around people that many people would just die just to meet. And I find that I don't appreciate that as much as I do people who have fallen down and have gotten up, people who've overcome incredible challenges. I'm not that impressed with privilege, but when I meet someone and they can tell you what they've come through and that they've overcome and how many people they've brought with them, how many people have they helped, that to me is inspiring. And so my mentor, I think it would certainly start off with my mother. I had several politicians that were my mentors along the way, and I'm really thankful for that. I had mentors at when I was in my early 20s. I lived in Zimbabwe, and some of the old women there that I got an opportunity to spend time with, they were mentors because I had seen these incredible African women that had been in a bush to fight for Zimbabwe's independence, these women that were active. Some of them didn't have education, yet they were raising 10 children. To me, that's impressive.
When you come to Africa and you sit behind your television and you watch TV, you see media representation of Africa. I mean, Western media representation of Africa. When you are here, do you feel that the contrast is absurd?
I think there's a big contrast, but I think the fundamental problem is it's really time for Africa to tell its own story. I have watched African countries and African people literally beg the mainstream media to get Africa's story right. And now with technology, Africa can write its own story, and I believe it's coming to that. But I'm looking forward to the African version of Al Jazeera, and I see that happening. Nobody, I mean, when I started working on Africa 30 years ago, no one could envision an MTN. And so I just see some innovations in technology that's coming out of Africa, some incredible stories, but it's Africa's story to tell the world. No one can tell your story better than you can.
Let's talk about school. I mean, your early years, siblings, sisters, brothers. What kind of family structure did you grow up in?
Well, I had a very close-knit family. My mother, I was very close to her. Had two fathers I talked about, having an incredible stepfather. We don't even consider him a step. He came into our lives when I was 5 years old. So he is my father, legally adopted and by my father. I have two sisters and a brother.
Okay.
And they all are doing quite well, making a difference in their own way. And we grew up just very, very close. And so I grew up fiercely independent. I moved out of my parents' home with their permission when I was 16.
Wow.
And I supported myself from the time when I was 16. I never came back home to ask my parents for money.
You were a strong woman.
No, I just felt, I mean, that's my biggest adjustment to being in Ghana, that children feel entitled to get money from their parents. I never knew that you could expect that from parents. So what I did is I started working actually in summers when I was 14, helping my parents. I moved out when I was 16, not because I had any problem, but I was just eager to move out and change the world.
And were those years of experimentation, or you had focus? I mean, as early as 16?
You know, I must admit, God protected me from a lot of things. And I really do think it was the influence of my mother. I never experienced drugs. I never had an interest in partying. I never smoked, or I just didn't have that interest. I really was a young woman on a mission. When I was 16, I moved out. I got into a program, an exchange program that moved me out of my town. I just moved to another place and started studying there. You know, we have different grade levels. I refused to finish the last grade in high school because I was eager to move on. So I was a bit of a radical. I just told my family, if you don't let me out of this school thing and let me go directly to college, I'm going to drop out. So that was my threat. And I didn't drop out. I found a college that would accept me at a younger age.
I see.
And so I started college a year early, and then I got a four-year scholarship.
You were
I studied in London.
From the very beginning, very much a go-getter.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was just early mentoring. Like I said, I started being mentored. When I was 13, 14, teachers that saw there's something different, there's something special. I can't say that I didn't make mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. But I've tried to learn from them and try to pass wisdom to other people so they can avoid making some of those mistakes. But that is my life. So I think that I have this limitless possibility kind of thinking and an unyielding refusal to fail. And that is what the message I try to give to young people. No matter what family you were born in, no matter what conditions you were born to.
No matter where you were born.
No matter where you are. You know, God is still king over every storm. And what I would tell them, find that purpose, live for something bigger than yourself. Because I believe that God will always bless what he can use. And as long as your life is useful to the kingdom, I believe God will bless it. And sometimes there are detours, there have been setbacks,
What
disappointments
were
for
some
all
of
of
the
us.
setbacks and detours and disappointments
Oh, I
you
had many
faced?
of them.
I
I
mean,
have many
leaving
of them.
home 16 years old
I
and trying
think
to
living home,
chart your own path.
yeah, living home at 16-year-old, I mean, I didn't get everything I'd hoped to get. I moved from being in a protective, when I was 16, I moved from being in a protective kind of environment in Washington, D.C. that I knew is a majority African-American city, to moving to a nearly all-white community and facing the kind of challenges with racism that I didn't know existed. I had not even been on a plane until that time. So you take this person, this black child from an all-black community, and you place her in the middle of Wisconsin, in an all-white community, but the story ended well because I was living with a very loving family who had really never engaged a black person, and I think that helped me to manage people with differences. Some of the same students that had a problem with me and I had a problem with them, we just found common ground and a way to come together. And so that early on, that planted the seed that reconciliation is possible. And it was part of an AFS program, which was an international program. So I got to meet students from all over the world. And at 19, I was studying in London, and I had to work very hard. This was all done on scholarships. And so I think that, you know, it's when you have to work hard because you don't have a choice. When you know you're in school and mommy and daddy are not paying for it. There's no rich aunt or rich uncle. You're only in school because you got a scholarship, and if you lose that scholarship, you're out of it. And that education is the key, a key, I will say. Then you're compelled to work harder, and it's like exercising in a gym. You exercise that muscle of your brain, of your willpower. You know, it's going to get stronger and stronger. So the more adversity, I think the more strength you develop. I didn't have the luxury of partying and doing those things that I saw some of the other
Looking
young
back,
people
you're
doing.
grateful you didn't have those opportunities, right?
I'm so glad that I didn't have those opportunities. I could just say that for me, life was, at a young age, was difficult, and that I didn't have the luxury of thinking about those kind of things. I was really about improving myself so that I could be better and do better and make a difference. That was my driving
But you
thing.
wouldn't say you took education too seriously?
No, I don't think I took education seriously enough because I really feel like there are a lot of things that, for example, if I had to do university over, I think I would find a way not to work as hard. I mean, I did university and I worked full-time in graduate school. Now, it was exciting because I was working for the U.S. Congress, which most people don't get the opportunity to do. And so by the time I graduated, I had a college degree and I had professional work experience. But I think my suggestion to young people now is find a way to really do internships summer, but don't try to do both.
Did you get to Congress through internship programs or?
Yeah, do competitive programs. I was always looking to seize opportunities. From the 16-year-old who found this opportunity to move through the AFS program to another state, to really finding the opportunities in college. It was a competitive internship program working for the Congress. I took it. I worked for our local municipal government starting when I was 14 as a volunteer, getting paid in the summer, saving up the money in the summer to support myself through the year. That's how I could leave at 16. So it's, some people say it's an incredible story. I don't know if it's really that incredible.
I think it is.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Well, I think the moral of the story, that it really is possible. You know, it really is possible. I can't say that, you know, in hindsight, you can talk about it and say, this sounds like a charmed life, but I can say there were some days that were very difficult. There were some days where it was hard to even get out of bed. There were some days where, you know, you go through this, and one thing about growing up fast, you discover things fast. So I had discovered betrayal early on, disappointments early on. I wasn't protected from those things. And so in a way, they're good because now as a young adult, when I was younger, out of college, working as a professional, I had a very tough skin. I find that sometimes the things that floor young people, the things that they cry about, amaze me. Someone doesn't like them, you know, not wanting to go to a job because the environment is not to their liking. You know, these kind of things, they just amaze me. So I'm grateful for the difficulties.
Grateful for the difficulties. Rosa Whitaker is my guest on PM Express Personality Profile. We'll take a snap break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.